The morning sun washed the airport runway in a soft golden glow, yet inside the crowded terminal, tension crackled in the air like a storm about to break. Passengers rushed from gate to gate. Announcements echoed across the hall, and somewhere amid the noise stood a tired, anxious single father named Ryan Holt, one arm clutching the hand of his 7-year-old son, Jace, and the other gripping a worn backpack that carried their entire world. What no one around them knew was that this seemingly ordinary man had once lived an extraordinary life, one he had walked away from after tragedy shattered the parts of him that used to soar. If you believe kindness deserves a second chance and that compassion still matters in this world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Good Deed Stories. Your support keeps stories of hope alive. Ryan stood in line for the flight from Denver to Seattle, shifting his weight as Jace tugged at his sleeve. The boy was excited. It was his birthday tomorrow, and they were flying to meet his grandparents, something he had been begging for over a year. But excitement didn't erase reality. Ryan had lost his job 6 months ago, and as he took up part-time work repairing old motorcycles, money became a ghost he could never fully catch. Even now, the tickets they held were purchased with the last of his savings. He wore faded jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and shoes so worn the fabric around the toes had thinned. His scruffy beard and exhausted eyes made him look older than his 39 years. In stark contrast stood the man behind him, Calder Royce, CEO of a booming tech corporation, clad in a perfectly tailored navy suit and shining leather shoes that probably cost more than Ryan's rent. Calder tapped impatiently on his phone, muttering loud enough for anyone to hear his frustration with the incompetence of airport staff and people who shouldn't fly if they can't afford to look presentable. Ryan ignored the comments at first, but waiting in line grows long for a child. Jace dropped his small toy airplane, and when Ryan crouched to pick it up, his backpack slipped and knocked lightly into Calder's leg. "What the?" Calder snapped as if struck by a hammer. "Watch it. Do you not understand personal space?" Ryan apologized softly, steadying Jace, but Calder wasn't done. He eyed Ryan from head to toe, then let out a scoff meant to be heard. "Figures. People like you shouldn't hold up lines. Or flights. Try not to embarrass yourself more than you already have." Ryan's jaw tightened. He wanted to fire back, to defend himself, to demand dignity. But one look at Jace stopped him. His boy didn't need to see anger. He needed safety. They eventually boarded, and fate, with its quiet sense of humor, placed Ryan and Jace directly across the aisle from Calder. The CEO groaned dramatically and shoved his suitcase overhead as if the world owed him better. The plane ascended smoothly into the bright blue sky, sunlight flooding through the cabin windows. Ryan tried keeping Jace occupied with drawing games, pointing out the clouds, reminding him of the birthday cake waiting in Seattle. The boy's laughter brought tiny sparks of warmth to Ryan's wary heart. But across the aisle, Calder watched them with thinly veiled disdain, sighing loudly every time Jace giggled. 2 hours into the flight, the calm shattered. The plane jolted, just once, but violently enough to send drinks sloshing over cup rims. Passengers gasped. Overhead lights flickered. A rumble pulsed through the fuselage like something alive. Then the captain's voice came on, strained and trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing our critical systems malfunction. Our primary navigation has failed, and we are losing altitude faster than expected. If there is anyone on board with experience as a military fighter pilot or advanced aviation operations, please notify the cabin crew immediately." The cabin erupted into chaos. A woman screamed. A baby wailed. People clutched armrests, faces pale with terror. Calder gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. The flight attendants rushed through the aisle, trying to calm everyone, their own hands shaking. Ryan froze. His chest tightened, his breath locked. He hadn't heard the words "fighter pilot" directed at him in years. Not since the day he walked out of the Air Force after losing his wife in an accident while he was deployed. Guilt had chased him endlessly since. He had promised to never fly again. He had promised to focus on being a father, to ground himself forever. But now the plane trembled again, dropping so sharply the overhead bins rattled. Jace's small hand gripped Ryan's forearm. "Dad, I'm scared." Something inside Ryan ignited. Something old, something buried. Something fierce. He stood up. Calder gawked at him as if watching a madman. "What are you doing?" Calder barked. "Sit down like the rest of us." Ryan didn't even look at him. He caught the nearest flight attendant's attention. "I can help," he said, voice steady with a strength he hadn't felt in years. "I was a fighter pilot for 14 years, lead tactical aviator. I've handled emergency navigation and manual descent controls more times than I can count. Take me to the cockpit." The attendant blinked, stunned, then grabbed his arm and hurried him down the aisle. Every eye watched him move. Some hopeful, some terrified. Calder's were wide with disbelief. As Ryan reached the cockpit door, the plane lurched again. He braced himself and stepped inside. The sight was grim. The young captain and co-pilot were drenched in sweat, alarms flashing red across the console. An electrical failure had crippled key systems. The plane drifted dangerously off course toward mountainous terrain below. Ryan slid into the co-pilot's seat without waiting for permission. His fingers danced across controls he hadn't touched in nearly a decade. But muscle memory returned like an old friend running into his arms. He manually reset the auxiliary navigation feed, toggled the emergency power relays, recalibrated the pitch angle, and redirected airflow valves to stabilize the cabin pressure. His heart pounded, but his mind was razor sharp. For the first time in years, he felt the sky become his ally again. The captain followed his commands, trusting him completely. Outside the cockpit, passengers clung to hope. Calder whispered frantically into his phone, leaving a message for his assistant. His voice cracking, he kept glancing toward the cockpit door as if expecting it to burst open with bad news. But slowly, the wild shaking softened. The altitude drop steadied. The turbulence leveled. People began to realize something was changing, something good. Then the captain's voice returned, stronger this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the immediate assistance of a former fighter pilot on board, we have regained manual navigation control. We are preparing for an emergency but stable landing. Please remain seated and stay calm." The cabin filled with gasps, this time of relief. Calder slumped back in his seat, stunned. As the plane approached the emergency runway at a small airfield, Ryan worked side by side with the captain, correcting wind drift and counterbalancing engine drag until the wheels hit the tarmac in a rough but safe landing. The plane screeched, jolted, then rolled to a stop. Silence. Then the cabin exploded with applause. Passengers cried, hugged, sobbed into their hands. Some called out, "Thank you," toward the cockpit. Ryan didn't hear much of it. His heart was focused only on one thing: getting back to Jace. When he stepped out of the cockpit, his son ran to him and wrapped his arms around his waist. Ryan held him so tightly it hurt. "You saved us," Jace whispered. "I'll always keep you safe," Ryan murmured, voice thick. The CEO stood frozen, unable to move, as if the truth pinned him to the floor. When Ryan walked past him, Calder swallowed hard, shame creeping up his neck like fire. He stepped forward. "Sir, I owe you my life. I owe you more than that. I'm sorry for how I spoke to you earlier." His voice trembled with honesty he wasn't used to showing. "If you're looking for work, my company could use someone with your leadership. Someone like you." Ryan blinked, shocked. Calder continued, softer this time, and not out of pity. Out of respect. Ryan looked down at Jace, whose small hand clung to his. Something in the boy's hopeful eyes told him it was time to rise again. Not for the world, not for strangers, but for the future waiting for them both. He extended his hand to Calder. The CEO shook it firmly, almost gratefully. Hours later, airport staff provided transportation, meals, and arrangements for connecting flights. Passengers kept approaching Ryan, thanking him, asking for photos, telling him he was a hero. But the only acknowledgement he truly cared about was the way Jace beamed proudly at him. Before boarding the replacement flight, the captain approached Ryan with moist eyes. "You saved over 100 lives today. We can never repay that." Ryan simply nodded, humbled. Just did what needed to be done. As the new plane took off, smoothly this time, sunlight bathed the cabin in warm golden rays, as if the sky itself honored the man who had once sworn never to fly again, yet had risen when the world needed him most. And in that peaceful ascent, Ryan realized something powerful. Sometimes life breaks us so we can rebuild stronger, wiser, and more grateful than before. Sometimes broken wings learn to fly again, not for glory, but for love.